She walked in carrying nothing but a burlap sack, and the room reacted like she'd brought a storm. Some smirked. One man cleared his throat too loud, but she didn't flinch. Her name wasn't yet on any list, but her presence was already rewriting one. 60 years ago, Josephine Langford had entered this same building and been told, without words, that she didn't belong. Today, she came back, not to ask, not to plead, but to remind them. Some names may fade from paper, but not from land. The whispers started before she even reached the counter, but they stopped when she didn't turn around. Josephine Langford's shoes brushed softly against the worn linoleum floor of the Fairburn County Land Records office, her gait unhurried, deliberate. The cold gray light from the flickering fluorescents cast long, uneven shadows, while cut-out paper turkeys and faded maple leaves trembled against the windows in the draft. She didn't look at the group of women near the coffee machine, whose chatter had dulled into tight murmurs. She didn't flinch when someone let out a chuckle too loud to be accidental. She'd been here before, 60 years ago. That time, no one had asked her name. No one had written anything down. Her coat, a sun-faded navy wool, buttoned high against the November chill, held the shape of someone used to standing in places where she wasn't meant to stay. A frayed burlap sack hung from her shoulder, drawing curious glances and an audible scoff from a clerk stacking files behind the counter. Still, she kept moving, her steps measured like someone counting the distance between what was and what should have been. Clint Randolph adjusted his cuffs as he stepped out from his office, eyes scanning the woman before him. Neat hair, pressed shirt, maroon tie with a barely visible pattern. Everything about him suggested control, but the flick of his wrist betrayed a practiced impatience. "Ma'am," he began, voice firm but not unfriendly. "Can I help you? Are you lost?" Josephine's gaze didn't flicker. "I'm here about parcel 14B. Behind the counter, a young clerk paused mid-sip from a styrofoam cup. In the corner, Lydia Randolph, Clint's daughter, all elbows and curiosity, glanced up from her sketch pad, pencil hovering as she took in the woman's stance, the set of her jaw, the way her hands rested against the sack without clutching. Sheriff Wade Harper pushed through the main doors then, the hinges whining at the strain. His boots hit the tile like punctuation marks. One look at Josephine, and his lips pulled into a familiar smirk. "Well now," he said, removing his hat but not the attitude. "This ain't the pantry line, is it?" A few chuckles circled the room, shallow and sharp. Josephine didn't blink. "I've brought everything I need," she said, eyes still forward. The sheriff tilted his head, studying her like a man, trying to remember if he'd seen this face at a protest or a prayer meeting. "You sure you're in the right place, miss?" "Langford," Clint supplied, glancing at the clipboard nearest him. "Josephine Langford." Harper raised a brow. "Langford, that name's familiar." "So is yours," Josephine said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a smile. It was just a fact, spoken like one might note the weather or the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Clint shifted his weight, tapping his pen against the desk. Lydia's pencil moved again, slower now. She wasn't drawing her usual cartoon foxes or castles. She was sketching the woman, her posture, her stillness, the strange gravity she seemed to pull into the room without effort. Josephine walked to one of the plastic chairs and sat, her sack still on her shoulder, untouched. The silence swelled for a moment, waiting for her to explain herself further. She didn't. Clint cleared his throat, stepping forward with a tone rehearsed for less confusing mornings. "Ms. Langford, what exactly is your business with parcel 14B? She looked at him, and for the first time, something in her eyes flickered. Not emotion, but memory. A flicker of sunlight across an old fence post. A sound of a name signed over without consent. "I'm not here to wander," she said. "I'm here to reclaim what was taken." The words were quiet, but they hung in the air with the weight of something heavier than the sack on her shoulder. Across the room, Caroline Miles adjusted her scarf and whispered something to the woman beside her. Harper crossed his arms. Clint didn't speak for a beat. Then he turned to the nearest clerk. "Pull the file on parcel 14B, he said, his voice a touch quieter than usual. Behind him, Lydia kept sketching the woman no one seemed to understand. It wasn't heavy with food or clothes. It was heavier than that. It carried time. The sack made a faint rasp as Josephine Langford shifted it onto her lap, the coarse fabric creaking like an old door hinge. The room hadn't grown louder since her words, but it had grown tenser. The cold gray light was now streaked with pale sunbeams, the kind that lengthened shadows without warming anything. They stretched across the scuffed tiles, crossing over the faded floor mat that still said, "Welcome in flaking red" cursive. Josephine opened the sack slowly, her fingers moving with a carefulness born of both reverence and certainty. No one moved. Clint stood behind the counter, arms crossed but no longer tight. Harper's hand hovered near his belt, not quite reaching the holster, but the implication hung in the air like dust. From inside, Josephine pulled out a yellowed envelope and a tightly rolled blueprint, bound with a thin leather cord. Her hands, steady and sure, laid them on the counter in front of Clint without ceremony. "This," she said, "was addressed to my father in 1961. It came with the map." Clint blinked. "Your father?" "Isaac Langford." The name hovered for a moment. Somewhere near the coffee machine, Caroline Miles adjusted her coat and gave a half chuckle. "That parcel's been unclaimed for decades. I'm sure we'd have records of any real transaction." Clint didn't respond. He unrolled the blueprint carefully, laying the fragile paper flat across the counter's laminate surface. Lydia leaned forward from her chair in the corner, her sketchpad forgotten for the moment, eyes fixed on the fading ink that marked out a tract of land, parcel number 14B, bordered with handwritten notes and initials. He turned to the envelope and carefully slid out a folded letter. The paper crackled as it opened, revealing typewritten lines under a town letterhead that had long since changed. His eyes scanned quickly, then slower. "It's a letter from the city planning board," he said, almost to himself. "But there's no registration stamp, no follow-up. This isn't in our system." "Because it never made it to the system," Josephine said. "My father was told it would be filed. Then he died. And the next year, the land was fenced off." Clint hesitated. "That would have triggered a reassignment. But I don't see any documents showing an official sale or return to city holdings." Caroline's voice rang out again, sharper this time. "Maybe it was a donation. Some families used to gift parcels for community projects. Churches, school programs." Josephine turned toward her slowly. "My father was no churchgoer, Ms. Miles, and he never gave away what he built by hand." The air shifted again. Lydia went back to sketching, her pencil moving more slowly now. She wasn't drawing Josephine this time, but something else. Perhaps the parcel itself, the way a child imagines land that's been talked about, but never truly seen. "He kept his blueprint in a cedar box," Josephine continued, "right next to his Bible. My best friend Mavis used to say it was the only thing he trusted to speak for him after he passed. She made me promise to keep it safe." "Mavis who?" Harper cut in. "Mavis Darden." Clint looked up, brows furrowed. "The midwife?" Josephine nodded. "She lived 3 houses down from the diner, the one that burned in quote 79. "I remember her," Clint muttered. "She passed away, what, 10 years ago?" 11, Josephine corrected softly. "But before she died, she told me to bring everything I had here. She said maybe the town would finally listen." Clint looked down at the counter again, at the faded lines and creased corners of a blueprint older than he was. His eyes settled on the corner of the page, Isaac Langford's signature, faint but legible. Then Josephine reached back into the sack one final time. This time, she pulled out a sealed envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, marked with a faded red wax seal and a stamp that read, "Fairburn Deed Transfer, 1962. Below it, a faint municipal notary seal, nearly rubbed smooth by age. She held it out to Clint. "I was told never to open this," she said, "only to deliver it." Clint took it with both hands, gingerly, like it might disintegrate in his fingers. His thumb brushed the raised seal, then paused. The envelope was heavier than it looked. He tilted it slightly, scanned the writing again, his eyes narrowing. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The name was familiar. The way it got there was not. Clint Randolph held the envelope like it was both artifact and accusation. Around him, the Land Records Office had grown denser, not louder, just thicker. Word had clearly drifted through town, because by now, more people had slipped in through the glass door, quiet as dust, and lined the walls in loose clusters. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Josephine Langford sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, coat buttoned tight despite the slight uptick in the thermostat. She didn't watch Clint. She watched the light sliding across the floor, as if tracking the slow reckoning of morning giving way to midday. He broke the seal. Inside was a copy of a notarized deed transfer, dated July 1962. The paper was dry and pale, brittle at the edges. Clint's eyes scanned line by line, his expression unreadable, until he reached the signature block. "There's no mark here," he muttered. Josephine didn't move. Clint looked up. "It says your father was the seller, but the signature line's blank." Harper leaned over, peering down at the document. "That's not a technicality. If the seller never signed," Clint's voice was flat, "then it was never completed." Beneath the unsigned seller's name was a neatly scrawled recipient. L. Randolph Sr. Caroline Miles stepped forward, eyes narrow. That must be a different Randolph. There were plenty. Clint didn't look at her. "That's my grandfather," he said, quietly. A pause stretched out. Lydia, who had slowly drifted closer to her father's side, looked up from her seat. Her voice, soft as dust and twice as sharp, broke through the hum of the fluorescence. "That's Grandpa Lou's name." Clint stared down at the paper, like it might rearrange itself if he blinked long enough. Harper said nothing this time, just folded his arms and leaned against the counter, eyes on Clint now, not Josephine. "I remember the day they nailed the new signs," Josephine said calmly. "I was 14. My father was already gone by then. I asked about the fence going up on the edge of our plot, and the man with the clipboard said it wasn't ours anymore, that someone had transferred it." She paused. "I told him I hadn't seen a sale, and he said, 'Then you didn't look close enough.'" Caroline's lips tightened. "Why didn't anyone say anything? There were public hearings, surely." "There were," Josephine replied, "but not for us. They needed someone black to give it up. When I wouldn't, they made it look like I did." Someone near the door exhaled sharply. Clint's fingers twitched slightly, still holding the paper. He wasn't defending anymore, not even internally. The weight in his gut was no longer confusion. It was recognition. He looked at Josephine. "And you've had this all these years?" She nodded once. There was a small sound as her sack shifted again. She reached into the inner flap this time, slower than before, and pulled out something heavier, a leather-bound ledger, its corners rubbed soft with use, its spine slightly cracked. She set it on the counter in front of him. "Now let's talk about what they erased." The room didn't go quiet because she raised her voice. It went quiet because someone finally listened. Josephine Langford rested both hands on the ledger's cracked leather cover. Her thumbs lingered on the faded spine, then opened it with the care of someone unsealing memory. A few pages flaked at the corners. The ink was uneven. Some notes were smudged by age, others marked with numbers and neat little ticks in the margins. No one spoke. Clint leaned in. The table, bathed in a soft wedge of sunlight from the high window, looked more like a courtroom bench than a desk. Lydia had stopped sketching. Her pencil lay idle on the arm of her chair. "These are tax receipts," Josephine said, turning a page. "Paid from 1949 to 1961. My father's handwriting." Clint glanced at the top slip. "Hand-stamped by Fairburn County." He checked another. "Monthly log entries, maintenance notes." "Fence repairs, storm drainage," Josephine murmured. "He did it himself. Had a jar for receipts, and this book for the rest." She turned more pages. Folded correspondence notes, clipped newspaper scraps, and at the back, a list of dates and initials. Clint recognized some names: early committee members, church volunteers, people long buried in town memory. "I checked the archive once," she said. "Half of these letters aren't in the public record." Clint frowned, reaching for his laptop. He searched the county archive and pulled up the scanned parcel history. Sparse, official, clean. He compared dates. His eyes narrowed. "They're missing entire years," he said. "No entries for 54 to 59. But your ledger shows activity every month." Across the room, Harper exhaled audibly and started pacing, the tap of his boot heel sharp against the floor. "Still just paper," he muttered. "No signatures, no validation, nothing legal here." Josephine didn't look up. She slid her hand into the back flap of the ledger and retrieved a thin envelope, yellowed and brittle. Inside, she unfolded a single page and placed it beside the rest. Clint leaned over and saw the seal first. Embossed, municipal, dated 1957. Then the signature, Isaac Langford. Below it, recipient, Town of Fairburn, land holdings transfer pending, not Randolph. Clint read the date aloud. May 6, 1957. The room drew in a breath and held it. Caroline, near the corner, froze mid-motion, her phone hovering near her cheek. She lowered it slowly without speaking. Harper stopped pacing. Josephine's voice was barely louder than the tick of the office wall clock. This building was never sold. It was stolen, notarized by a man who was disbarred 2 years later. Lydia blinked. Her eyes found her father's face, searching. Clint remained seated. He didn't fidget, didn't pace. He just stared at the paper, at the ledger, at the neat signature in faded ink. Then he looked at Josephine, her coat still buttoned to the collar, her expression unreadable. He nodded once, the movement barely perceptible. My family lied. The badge lost its weight the moment no one obeyed it. Sheriff Harper stepped forward, hand twitching near his belt, eyes fixed on the ledger like it was a loaded weapon left unattended. The worn leather book sat squarely on the counter, surrounded by the quiet gravity of proof. Clint stood behind it, upright, expression carved in granite. This needs to be removed from public access, Harper said, each word clipped. Clint didn't blink. This stays here. This is evidence. You gonna protect lies, boy? Harper's tone sharpened. The word boy didn't land as a slip. It landed like a habit. Josephine remained seated, her spine unbent. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to move. Not yet. The room had thickened with bodies, clerks, residents, even a realtor or two who had come to renew deeds now stood still, phones in their hands, some recording, some pretending not to. The warmth in the air wasn't comfort. It was tension, rising like steam off boiling asphalt. Caroline Miles shifted near the copy machine. Her scarf, once crisp, hung uneven now. She was dialing, but no one picked up. Clint kept his eyes on Harper. You're not taking it. You're not touching it. Harper took a step closer. One more inch, and they'd be chest to chest. Then Lydia's voice cut through everything. You're scared of her. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. Everyone heard it. Clint turned, eyes flicking down to his daughter, who now stood not behind the desk but beside him, chin slightly lifted. She didn't look angry, just certain. Like someone who had seen the whole picture and knew exactly which line was crooked. Harper stared at her, but his next move stalled. Deputy Ross had arrived quietly through the rear hallway, and now he stepped forward, boots firm, one hand resting near his belt, not in threat, but in attention. He looked at Clint, then at Josephine. Then he took another step closer, to Clint's side. That movement broke something invisible, a shift, like a string pulling tight and then snapping quietly, rearranging the air. Clint exhaled, slow and sure. Effective immediately, he said, his voice cutting through the hush. I'm placing a stay on all transactions related to parcel number 14B. I'll be filing a formal fraud inquiry with the state court before day's end. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, affirmation, a few half-caught phrases. Caroline backed toward the hallway. Harper didn't move. Not forward, not back. His badge gleamed, but for the first time, it looked like an accessory, not a threat. Josephine reached for the edge of the counter and stood slowly. Her movements, as always, were precise. Her coat shifted at the shoulder. The burlap sack hung empty now, but no one looked at it with derision anymore. She looked at Clint, then at Ross, then back at the crowd, and then she smiled. Then it's begun. She walked out with the same sack on her shoulder. But now, people moved to make way. The noon light cut clean across the brick path in front of the Fairburn County Land Records building, throwing soft shadows under benches and blowing leaves into idle spirals. Josephine Langford stepped through the doorway without hesitation, her coat catching the breeze, the burlap sack slung over one shoulder like it always had been. But this time, the hush that followed her wasn't laced with mockery. Clint stood just outside the doors, a single sheet of paper in his hand, creased slightly from where his thumb had pressed too tightly. His shirt collar had loosened. His face was drawn, but his back was straighter than it had been all morning. He offered her the notice. She didn't rush to take it. She simply looked him in the eyes, saw what had shifted in the man, and then reached for the page with both hands. I've waited 60 years, she said. I can wait a few more. There was no triumph in her voice, only the steadiness of someone who understood time differently than the rest. From the edge of the building, Lydia ran forward, notebook clutched to her chest. She stopped in front of Josephine, a little breathless but beaming with something more than admiration. Recognition. I finished it, she said, holding out the drawing. Josephine took it with surprising gentleness. The paper bent a little under her fingers. It was pencil on thick sketchstock, a woman standing tall, not smiling, not proud, just present, with a courthouse in her shadow and a deed in her hands. She didn't say anything, just touched the corner of the sketch with one weathered finger and nodded. Ross stood nearby, watching. His hat was off, one hand gripping it loosely by his side. He stepped forward, not too close. "If you need a ride, ma'am," he offered. Josephine turned to him, eyes soft. "I'll walk," she replied. Ross nodded, stepped back. No one blocked her way. There was no applause, no flashbulb, no parade. Just the stillness of acknowledgement. A town that had once erased her name, now stepping aside without being asked. She made it to the sidewalk, paused at the edge where the red bricks met the asphalt, and turned back to glance at the building. Her eyes lingered not on the people, but on the wall where the property records were kept. Then upward at the courthouse clock, its hands steady at 12:05. "This time," she said, "I won't be forgotten." And then she turned again. The sack shifted slightly against her back with each step. From its inner pocket, tucked into soft cotton folds, a small letter remained unseen, its edges curled, its ink faded but intact. The handwriting was unmistakably Mavis Darden's. "When they forget your name, remind them you never left." The courthouse behind her still carried the echo of paper shifting and boots tapping, but Josephine Langford had already stepped beyond it. Shoulders squared, sack steady, name reclaimed. She didn't walk faster or stand taller. She simply walked as if the ground had remembered who it belonged to. Justice didn't arrive with sirens or speeches. It arrived in silence, in ledgers preserved, in a child's sketch, and in the trembling voice of a man finally telling the truth. What was stolen didn't vanish. It was merely waiting for someone with the patience to retrieve it, one receipt, one signature at a time. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not shouted. They are carried in sacks, passed through generations, and spoken when the world is finally quiet enough to listen. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who's still waiting for their name to be remembered.